The views and opinions expressed in this podcast episode are solely those of the individuals participating and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Riverbend Media Group or the Riverbend Awareness Project, its affiliates, or its employees. It is important to note that the discussion presented is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified healthcare professionals for any medical concerns or decisions. The Riverbend Awareness Project is a product of Riverbend Media Group.
Hey, this is Melissa.
And this is Emma.
Welcome back to the Riverbend Awareness Project. This month, we're talking about National Impaired Driving Prevention, and we have Lieutenant Marvin Crain from the Idaho State Police with us today. Could you give a little introduction of yourself?
Well, I'd like to thank you for having me, and I appreciate that, and it's always a good opportunity to come and visit about this topic. It's something we need to discuss and make the public aware of, but I have been in law enforcement for 36 years. In that time, I've been on DUI task force and different things of that nature, and so very well aware of the content that we'll be speaking about today.
So our first question is, what is covered under the umbrella of impaired driving?
What's covered under that? Well, so when you talk about being impaired, a lot of people don't want to talk about just alcohol, right? Well, if I go drink alcohol, I can't drive. That's true and correct. Unfortunately, with that also, there's many things that impair our ability to have our reaction time, our functioning time delayed. And so that could be as much as like huffing paint, alcohol, illegal drugs. And this is the big one. A lot of housewives, and we see this mostly in housewives, not that men don't do it, but they think if a doctor prescribes it, it's okay. I can take it and it's not going to affect me and I can drive. The only problem with that is under a doctor's care, if they're going to prescribe an amount that's going to affect your driving, they'll let you know while on this medication, you can't drive. But if you self-medicate and overdose, or not necessarily overdose, but over-medicate yourself, it can affect your driving ability. And so a lot of times we see that where they're taking prescription medications and it's under the influence and they don't realize it because they think, oh, it's a prescribed drug from my doctor, I'm fine.
I never thought about that before too. Obviously it makes sense because it's a chemical that alters your body. And so, yeah, that would alter how you drive.
And another one that is, if you want a real severe headache, huff paint or, any of those toxics and you can get a huffing high and have an extreme headache when you're done, right? So, So it's anything that really alters your ability to drive a vehicle.
Could you please talk a little bit more about how exactly, maybe that's a bad question, because I feel like it's different based on which substance you're using or what.
What kind of an impairment we're going to see?
Yeah, what kind of impairment it's going to see, but what are ways that can affect driving?
Well, first of all, anytime we're talking about being under the influence, it's changing our ability to react in a reaction time that is common and amongst us all. A delayed reaction time is what I would like to say on that. Our thinking process is delayed. So when we talk about alcohol, it depends on the size of the person, their alcohol consumption. So if you consume a lot of alcohol, a lot of the times you probably can consume more before you get to that level of intoxication than somebody that is the same size as you that hasn't drank in their life and all of a sudden drank for their first time. When we talk about huffing, that kind of high is really potent at first, but it drops off really quickly. Okay. And so same thing when we talk about like meth or cocaine or anything like that, the high's going to peak and then it's going to drop off and you're going to come back a lot of times faster than if you are like intoxicated with alcohol where you're extremely high in intoxication. And then the average person drops off at about a 0.02 every hour. Now, that's not consistent for everybody. Once again, it depends on the individual and how they come down off that and how their body makeup is.
Thinking of over-the-counter prescriptions like you were talking about, how can you tell if you're safe to drive?
That is a tough one, right? Because you may not notice it yourself. If you've been taking these medications, you may not notice that you are a little off. That's when it becomes important for somebody in your life, a family member, a friend, to say, hey, you're a little off balance. Your decision-making skills aren't the best right now, and that's when you're going to want a doctor or a family member to kind of help guide and direct you on, hey, if you're going to need that kind of prescription level, you probably shouldn't be driving.
How have driving laws changed and evolved over the years in relation to alcohol and other controlled substances? And then how have those changes impacted
Have they made an
accident.
impact?
Yeah, have they made an impact?
Yeah, have
That's
they
a
made an
better
impact?
question.
Yeah. The biggest thing we've seen in Idaho, and this happened years ago, is we went from a 0.10 legal level to a 0.08. And with that, we really seen a drastic decline in incidents involving alcohol impairment as far as accidents and things of that nature. When we talk about other things that have affected that, I would say this: training and education to the officers. And we have a drug recognition expert program. We call it the DRE program, and it stands for Drug Recognition Experts. And we take as many of our people that are willing to go and take that course and put them through that. And with that, that just gives them a little more knowledge, a little more experience, that when they're at that car and they're interacting with that person, to recognize the signs and indicators that might indicate that they're driving under the influence. And at that point, they're more capable of asking them out of the car and furthering that investigation.
I was actually wondering about that because you see all these signs like report drunk driving and stuff. And I was like, how would I even know? Sometimes people are just crazy drivers. So how would you even report that?
If you're driving down the road, and we love that we have that, and it's star ISP, right? So it's star 477. And so when you're driving, we get a lot of calls from the public. And when we get the opportunity to follow up on those, we find a very high percentage success rate of apprehending DUI or impaired drivers. So as a normal person, as you're driving down the road, what should I be looking for? I see the signs, but what should I be looking for? Because a lot of people are texting and driving now, right?
Or they just drive like maniacs.
Yeah. And texting and driving can be just as dangerous as driving under the influence, because you're taking your focus off the road for 3 to 5 seconds at a time. That's just like being delayed because of an intoxicating substance in your body. With that, if you see a person that's weaving in and out of their lanes, speeding up, slowing down, erratical speeds up and down, not maintaining their lane, maybe hitting the curb, making erratic jerks to their steering, anything that's not common and it doesn't stop, right? So you see it and somebody's on their cell phone, they drifted over the white line, they hit the rumble strips, they make a correction and they stay in their lane after that. Not that we don't see people just continue to do that and eventually stop them and tell them, hey, here's your citation for hands-free. Don't text and drive. But a lot of times if people are texting and that, they'll hit the rumble strips, they'll get focused back on their driving. But if you see those patterns continue without correction, that's when you can call star ISP, star 477 and report that. And if you don't know, if you can't remember that number, there's always 911.
I feel like too, like if you're like, oh, maybe they're just on their phone, like that's still driving impaired.
It's driving distracted, right?
Yeah.
And driving distracted is just as bad as driving impaired, because like we talked about earlier, you take your eyes off the road 3 to 5 seconds, you're covering several hundred feet of roadway, and especially if you're at 80 miles an hour.
Even like we were talking earlier about drowsy driving too, like that's distracted driving. And texting, I feel like there was something else we talked about but maybe that was just it, being on your phone, falling asleep, and being under the influence. Like they're all going to affect how you
They're
drive.
really going to increase your opportunity to be involved in a serious crash, right?
That's not an opportunity I want.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if you are drowsy, the best thing to do is pull over, get out, walk around, get some blood flowing, maybe get yourself a snack or a drink, do those things, and then get back in your car and drive. Don't think, oh, I can make it another mile. I can make it, it's only 6 more miles. A lot of times when we see that, the individuals are really close to their home by the time they end up crashing, because they're thinking, oh, I can push through, I can get there.
Once my sister and I were driving home from our grandma's house, and I was really tired, and I was like, okay, you've got to keep me awake. So we're both going to scream the whole way through. So we're just driving our car screaming. It only actually lasted about a street. And then I was like, okay, I'm good. I can drive now.
And I'm hoarse. I can't talk tomorrow.
You talked about how the blood alcohol level changed, right? So a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or higher is legally considered drunk driving. But can a lower level of alcohol consumption still affect driving?
Absolutely. We still see signs of impairment as a person ingests alcohol. And we need to go back to this. It depends on what your toleration rate of alcohol is, how often you drink, what your body type is, how much food have you consumed, and all those things play into a factor. Now, when we talk about, I stopped somebody, they've had a drink or maybe 3 drinks, and it looks like they are impaired. I get them out, have them do field sobriety tests, and I determine as a police officer, they're under the influence. And then we ask and take a breath sample, and that breath sample comes under 0.08. But it just doesn't add up to what I seen during the field sobriety test. At that point, what we're going to do is ask for a blood test or a drug recognition expert to come and do an evaluation on this person. Because through my training experience, I'm probably going to be able to say, there's something else on board, whatever that might be. And then I can call one of these experts to come in and confirm what I'm thinking. And then we'll ask for a blood sample and see what we get back on that. Now on that, we won't be citing you for DUI that night unless it's obvious, but we'll get the blood sample, we'll submit it to the lab, and when it comes back positive, then we'll come back and issue the citation for the DUI. And so it doesn't have to just be one substance alone to get you impaired, right? It can be multiples, a cocktail of things that does that. So if you're drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana, or smoking marijuana and huffing paint, it doesn't matter what that is in conjunction to what you're doing, as long as it's impairing what your ability is to drive.
That seems like a lot to keep track of too. If you're like, have a drink and then you're like, wait a second, is my blood levels? Right. I don't know. It just seems kind of like you can't really keep track of that.
Cognizant of it in the moment. So just maybe don't.
And that's why it's important to have a plan, right? Because when you start drinking, your decision-making skills decrease. And so if you don't have a plan and you go there and you weren't planning on drinking, and you have one drink and you think, oh, I'm fine. And then you have another drink, oh, I'm fine. And pretty quick, you're not fine, but you didn't have a plan. So you're like, I got to go home anyway.
Can people's driving still be impaired if they aren't showing signs of intoxication?
Absolutely. When we talk about it's going to affect everybody differently upon their makeup, on how much do they consume alcohol, what's their body type. I arrested a gentleman one time for DUI, and his alcohol content at that time was extremely high. He was excessive, which is 0.20 or higher. But I think when he was down around 0.8, he probably actually functioned as a person, and as you visually observed him, better than he did when he wasn't drinking, because he was a severe alcoholic. And so when you'd watch him early in the mornings prior to him start drinking, he'd have the shakes and he was unstable and different things. But what would happen is he would get to that point, he functioned pretty well, but then he'd drink past that until he's excessive, right? So, yeah, I think there's times that you can observe somebody and think, oh, they're fine. And it'll surprise you, their blood alcohol will be over that 0.08. So how do we determine that? Through our training and experience, we're talking to them, we're looking at their eyes, we're looking at other indicators that we're trained to look and watch, and we're still going to go through our process and ask them for a breath sample.
What are some misconceptions or myths about driving under the influence?
The one you hear a lot is, oh, I drive better when I'm drunk because it relaxes me. I'm not as tense.
I've never heard that one before.
What have you heard?
I haven't actually heard any, probably, because I don't drink alcohol.
Yeah.
So I don't usually frequent places that there is a lot of alcohol consumption. So,
but yeah, you hear that. Oh, I actually drive better after I've had a few drinks because I relax and I'm more calm. That's a huge myth. It doesn't matter whether you feel more calm, your reaction time and your decision-making skills are still, affected.
Something that I read was that sometimes people will think, oh, it's been an hour or it's been 2 hours since I drank, I'm good to go. But how can you really know when the alcohol or whatever you're taking has worn off enough that you're safe to drive?
On the regular person, on average, it leaves the body at 0.02%. But the question is, how do I know where I started? How do I know if I'm a 0.14? How do I know if I'm a 0.18? And how do I know how alcohol is affecting me? And so when you talk about that, that is a super hard graph. And nobody's going to do that, right? When we talk about our judgments impaired, we're not going to go there if we're consuming alcohol. Like, oh, I drank 16 ounces of 0.06% alcohol at 2 o'clock. And mark it on your graph and then keep track of what time and, displacement and all that. So the best plan would be to prepare ahead of time. Have a success plan in place when you know you're going to go out and participate in any consumption of alcohol or any illegal drugs or anything that may impair your driving.
What could that plan kind of look like? What could be some actions that you can plan for or options to make sure that plan is successful?
Well, one thing for sure, if you don't have a car, you can't drive. Right?
That's true.
So if you find a way to get someplace and don't take your vehicle, that way you're forced to either use a taxi, Uber, walk, a friend to drive you home. Designated drivers are a great idea, but I can tell you over the years I've arrested many. Oh, I'm the designated driver. Well, can I check you? Oh, no, as a designated driver, I only had a few. right? So I'm limiting myself because I'm the designated driver, but they're still over the legal limit. And so just because you're not acting as obnoxious as the people in the back doesn't mean that you're safe to drive. So with that being said, even if you're going out as a group of friends, and really who wants to be the designated driver if you're into consuming alcohol and hang out with a bunch of obnoxious people if you're not drinking, right? So make a plan so you can enjoy your evening too. Make that plan so that we know, or that you know, that you're going to have a ride home at the end of it that doesn't consist of you having to try to make a decision. Am I okay to drive or not?
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our episode on National Impaired Driving Awareness. Listen to the rest of the conversation on December 15th to learn about the consequences of a DUI and the time Lieutenant Crain pulled over a driving dog.